Yeah, and they get pretty intense. And the whole backstory there is just about how Yoshi is obsessed with machinery.
Well, and you had talked about he almost needs to be someone who had been hanging around in a mechanics shop, right? To get a lot of like his drawings of the robot seem like someone who's been hanging out in the mechanics shop, and that is a character in there, is the guy in
right. Yoshi is the avatar of that of that viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, you think he's almost like a Shiro stand-in in this?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he enables that impulse to take flight. Let's say.
Yeah, we should also talk about how Shiro's pen name is it's a very cocky pen name.
Oh yeah.
Oh, is it? What is it?
Because it's the name of a famous sword maker, like an ancient Japanese sword maker.
Okay.
Because his real name is Ota.
Okay.
And the interestingly enough, that Fred Schott interview I was talking about gives a little bit of additional insight into that. Apparently, when Schott went to go interview him in person, Shiro's manager took him to what do you call a sake bar right before they went to the interview, and said this is very important. And the sake bar was named Masamune.
Oh, nice! Like maybe he was hanging out there. If you go back a bit to one of the pages you were looking at before, there's when she's in the hospital room with Briar Rose. There's this interesting establishing shot. That one, the establishing shot, like the fourth panel there, it's just like shows you the room with no characters in it. And I think that's a really cool way to be like, this is where you are, and then here's the main character. And it's like you could have made her face in one panel,
right?
But yeah, it's almost like it just exists as like a scene piece.
It's kind of the ice cream trick, a little bit. Again, the disconnect of information that you have to connect in your mind. Yeah, I'm gonna flip through these now because these are the ones that Brandon you sent over.
So his name basically means like super cool sword steel, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like imagine if an American artist just put in a thing and it's like, my name is
Excalibur Douglas.
Yeah, exactly.
Or no, Excalibur Adamantium.
Yeah, pretty much.
Excalibur Adamantium badass. Yeah.
Which, he justifies his name. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, maybe that's the thing. It's like he's like, if I'm gonna have this name, I better draw all those background windows.
That is putting it out there. You got to live up to it.
Yeah. That panel at the bottom of Athena chastising him is so like, what a horrible. Like, I don't know if Shiro hates Athena as much as I hate Athena. But it's so amazing just be like,
knowledge and technology are there to be used. You're not the ones to judge.
Just showboat. I'm gonna get you. There's the ice cream scene again.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, this is it's interesting how often we tag the same stuff. But for different reasons sometimes. Like, Brandon, this is the page you were talking about with the ordering, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Also, a weird point on this with the name tags. If you go down to the bottom there, Chiffon's name tag says Alice, which helps no one.
She borrowed it from a friend.
Yeah.
And then I had tagged this panel because, Sean, I think this is that pattern that you were showing me.
Right.
That you were applying, but when you applied it to drawing the Berserk sword, you went over and then hashtagged it.
Basically hatched over it in 90-degree angles. Yeah. Brandon, I don't know if you ever spent any time with those how to draw manga books that were published, 40 of them or whatever in 2000, 2001. A handful of those I found to be very interesting and very interesting in sort of decoding some of the things that I had noticed about as visual tropes, since a lot of those books are written by assistants, to different mangaka. You hear people talking about all these visual tropes in fairly literal ways. Like, here's how you do this thing, and this is why you want to do this thing. And when you get a job being an assistant, here's why you're going to want to do this thing.
Look at how much more confused Chiffon looks now.
Yeah, but that's what it represented, right? It was like distress and confusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was interesting because we had just talked about that, and I was reading it. Oh, there it is. Let's see. This is the one that we're gonna.
Oh, let's not look too carefully at it, or I'm gonna get ideas
Okay.
about how to.
Okay.
Also, she's wearing high heels in her mecha, which is another weird. There's these things where it's like he's so specific about why you do this, and then she'll have heels on in her robot suit, and I'm like, I don't know if that's what would actually happen.
This is that scene early where you're looking through Briar Rose's helmet to the sound he's hearing.
And also the note on the bottom for the Hesh clips, which are a real thing, just
right.
the high explosive squash heads that they're going to use to not penetrate the armor they're shooting against, but just to like create an impact.
He does that a lot, like explaining the acronyms. That seems very important to him throughout the book. I think that was another thing that as a kid turned me off because, I just like not into military gear in that way. And so I was like, God, I don't care. Like I get it. It's some kind of thing.
From the modern perspective of being 20 years away from him putting out genuinely new material, I felt that was a little ominous to me. I felt a little bit like I did in the shower scene, like I was looking at the sort of like hyper focus artistic mindset that might derail future productivity, if that makes sense.
Which is the thing that when you were talking about Otomo and
right.
Tezuka warning him, you're not going to be able, let's see where he is in 10 years. Like you're not going to be able to keep that up. You're going to wear yourself out.
Yeah. And oftentimes, I mean, as I think we all know from different perspectives, but, as an artist, when your focus and your aesthetic judgment are the things that give you power, but they are also the things that like, have you waking up to go up and redraw something that you've already finished or,
Yeah, it seems like Shirow, his major, I would even guess his major source of income, if not kind of what he's known for, is like derivative work of his rather than his actual comics. It's like Ghost in the Shell is this gigantic thing that where the manga is like the least part of it.
Yeah, it's a licensing empire. I mean, obviously he doesn't have to work a day in his life, and also people do what they want to do, and I'm not judging him like that. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, like, oh, he stopped working. I just mean like I could see, you get like insights into like the person who designed that there. So I wonder, are those
the difference there?
Yeah, are those really his pencils, or are these like essentially like rough layouts, like his like name or whatever they call it? Like that's very interesting. Some of them look like totally one for one.
Different.
And then
some of them are super like
this is a different page as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it's a totally different page. That's why I included that one. And kind of much more like girls comic than all the other stuff. And yeah, this one you can see the chiffon when he's like scratching in her skin tone always.
Oh yeah,
interesting. Do you think that do you know how many assistants he used, if at all, or is this all him?
I think this is all him, unless he had somebody laying basic tones for him.
Yeah, because he used some assistants later on.
Right.
But I think it's like one of those things. Even like even the guy that did Naruto only has the ability to. He only would have a couple assistants, I think, because I think the difficulty is oftentimes if you have a style that's so unique, you can't really find people that can emulate your actual line. So we could have somebody, filling in blacks or doing screen tone sky. But it's like as soon as you have to draw a line, anything that's not Shirow would stand out.
Right.
I was just wondering because of this, like if he sketched out a city kind of loosely, okay, have some forms over here, have some forms over here, and then handed it off to an assistant. Because the rest of the page looks like pretty one-to-one, but this is wildly different. So I wonder if this just went off to a background artist or not.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think he's one of the rare guys that kind of wasn't able to kind of work with those guys. Also, at this point, I don't think he was as big a name even where that would be an option.
No, even though Appleseed won an award, it was not popular on the level of like Shonen Dump or something like that. I mean, put out by a smaller publisher, and but yeah, I mean, he also produced these like basically one every year and a half for the 4 years, 5 years or 6 years he was working on it. So it's not like outside the realm of possibility for a single person to.
Yeah, he wasn't a weekly guy ever. I mean, he produced a lot, but kind of like a monthly guy does. It's interesting looking at like artists like Urasawa on his 20th Century Boys or Monster, those things. He's a guy that I think he has a team of 7 assistants, and it's really fascinating seeing what a really good cartoonist does when he has a team of people and how the finished work looks. And he's a guy where it's almost like his lines become so much less important, or it less personal, less important that it's personal. Where Shirow, I do think that it's like really important that every line be drawn, or at least look like it's drawn by him.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, look at that.
This is this is obviously just a rough, because this panel has totally changed this whole scene. And same thing here. Like, this is obviously the first page of chapter 4, but he's totally changed the background and stuff. That's
the editor was like, "You got to add a bird, dude. Drew, you got to add a bird. I can't. Don't come into this office until there's a bird on that page."
He's like, "But the birds would fly too close to the giant solar panels and they'd burn up. I got to add a footnote."
Yeah, this whole scene is redone, isn't it?
Yeah, like I don't even know what this is. This looks like a total. Well, no, it has to be
Yoshi.
the same page because this is kept together.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is all. That's interesting. Yeah,
it looks to me like maybe he this is he just worked at a fairly detailed rough and then maybe blew up the roughs for the successful panels that he was actually going to work for, because it looks to me like, even though they look like roughs, the proportions are almost all 1-to-1 on this, quote unquote successful panels that are going to be carried over.
That top right one is killing. Like he threw that one out. Like that's
the one
to the right of that.
Right of that. Yeah, that's mind-boggling.
Yeah, like that's one of those things. I feel like if I penciled that, I'd be like, okay, it's not the best storytelling, but I'm keeping it.
Right.
Yeah. But this one too, like that was one when we were looking at like, oh, are we gonna, instead of recreate, we're gonna ink over top of a pencil. Like there's so little that's resolved in there, but it's also suggestive. Like as an artist, I would have a really hard time not coming in and then just noodling away and filling all that in. And I don't know, there's so much there to play with.
Yeah.
It would be hard not to play.
It's funny drawing a drop of sweat, but not drawing the eyes.
Priorities, Brandon, priorities.
Storytelling. Let's see, what else do we got?
Man, those are fantastic. There's that establishing shot. Oh, and the exterior shot too.
Oh. And there's the future of Shirow on the left there.
Yeah.
Man, what a fantastic drawing though. That's just man.
I love that crowd scene in the bar. It's one of those things where like every character in there looks well designed enough where you can imagine them having their own story, but only Chiffon, I think, in there is the one that we follow up on.
That's always mind-boggling to me, and you do that a lot in your work, because I'm not a real big pre-visualizer. Like I'm not good at coming up with stuff. That's why I have to be looking at things most of the time. I mean, I can doodle and come up with something cool, but when guys like you and guys like him will fill a whole scene with just people that seem like individuals doing, Jeff Darrow, Moebius, any of, like they're all doing something that seems natural, like a natural pose. And
Darrow's got a weird, him and James Stokoe are like this weird kind of animal where they just like have to draw everything. It makes, like, sometimes I feel like an artist like Mike Mignola almost makes me feel like my vision's a little bad, because he'll draw a bookshelf and just do the shapes of the books without getting too detailed on it. But then you have guys like Darrow or Stokoe where it's like I don't need to see that much. That is so much detail on every, you're drawing the binding on the book or something. I have a lot of tricks I do when I do like crowd scenes. I'll do one time I worked on an issue of Empowered off of an Adam Warren script, and it had this blast on it because I decided every character that was in the background was going to be a character from Dirty Pair issue 1. So every time I had to draw a background character, I just flip through it and do it. And I do that a lot with like Milo Manara books. I'll just pull off a Milo Manara book. You can't do it with Moebius because Moebius background people look too much like Moebius characters.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I have to fill a crowd, sometimes I'll just draw someone else's crowd, like characters from it.
Okay, so here I'm sitting here thinking that you've just got this like relentless imagination that you're constantly generating, and you're like just pulling out books off. All right, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Well, I think I've explained before. I used to hang out with these guys that were DJs, and it amazed me that they would make music out of other people's music. And I was like, oh, they don't have to create everything whole cloth. And I think that's such a revolution in art when you're like, oh, I don't have to actually, invent every robot I draw. You can just, or every building, for instance, you can just draw a real building.
Right.
Yeah. But see, what happened to me is I got too far down that hole. And at some point, my imagination died a little bit from being a teenager to where I'm at now. I started photo referencing too much, and I wasn't making stuff up enough. And it's something I'm trying to get back. So
you get to a point where you got a gap between two separate skill sets that could be interrelated, but the gap becomes too wide, and you have to be like Barbaros here, and fly up into the air and accidentally pull the blood.
And when I look at Brandon's work, like what I see is just like you can't photo reference any of that. Like it's all just completely fantastical. So I'm always, it's always that thing where you're like, God, I can't even imagine doing that. But those are the things that I love and envy.
It's interesting kind of because you can kind of photo reference stuff because, you can photo reference composition.
Yeah.
And sometimes I will take the composition of something and then draw something completely different, just with the basic shapes still there.
That makes sense. See, I have to have shapes on the paper in front of me, and then I can get going. Whereas my assumption is that guys like you just have these rich inner worlds. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but
I have this funny thing where I was watching there's a recent Tarantino interview that I was watching, and he was talking about this very kind of common thing where people talk about, like, I started writing this and then the characters just spoke to me. And I'm always really cynical and frustrated that is not how I work, because it feels like solving math problems to me sometimes, where I'll just be like, I made a list of everything I can do in this scene. There's the character being like, and then I just had to eat grapes. It's always just like the character could eat grapes or salad, which one works better for the story?
Yeah, I wonder if it matters though how you're coming about it. If you're creating something that's compelling and translatable to other people's brains,
Right,
that great mystery between us. The black box, that Shirow referenced it in a couple of interviews that I read. The idea of a black box that human thinking is largely on faith and is black box like in a sense that we don't really ever get to see the mechanics of an interior of another person. We rather see the way that they respond to us and their environment and the things that they do. And similarly, you can imagine what is happening inside of the characters' heads, or they can just do stuff. And those two things might yield similar results to the other reader or to a reader,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because so much of reading Appleseed is being like, what is happening in these characters' minds?
This is a very interesting.
Oh yeah, very different. Is this the same page, just a panel that he scrapped?
Yeah, I had asked, so there was two things that I had pre-scanned, and then I said, can you scan the pencils for those? These were the two where I wanted to actually look at the print quality a little bit, because this one to me feels like the character got lost. So I was curious to see what his pencils look like, because when I looked up close, the dots actually seem to reprint pretty good. I don't know, Sean, you have a better.
Yeah, they just it's a fill-in issue for that particular one. It's a fairly tight gradient screen, and so the top of the gradient screen fills in more because the ink has a tendency to fill in earlier on the denser that it is. But yeah, it's not that dark in the other printings that I've seen. That particular.
Yeah, image. So but also because he does do this stuff where he wants the scenes to feel more like what it would feel like to be in them. I was curious if there was something in the pencils that would give an indication of if he had kind of planned it to be that dark or not. And then when we got this, I was like, oh my God, it's a totally different composition. And actually, I looked at those pencils and again was like, that's the thing I would want to draw. versus this. So I found that to be an interesting change. I didn't scan the rest of this page, just that one panel, but also this set of pencils here is like, man, you just want to draw.
It's just fantastic.
Want to draw that.
Yeah, and that's another panel he threw out too, I think.
Yeah,
I think this whole composition's thrown out. Yeah.
Look at the bottom right.
The cement crush there. Look at that, the cement breaking apart on the impact, and the way that she's still falling. You can see the sort of, physics of it, like her leg up in the air, her head up in the air. He's cradling her for the impact that hasn't quite happened yet.
Yeah.
Very, very, I mean, it's just, it boggles the mind.
I'm surprised he didn't diagonal the sound effects in the background, because it seems like they're so vertical that it'd be interesting to tilt them.
Like that. The sound effects here.
Yeah.
Like bring it in a little bit, like along that path.
Yeah, that's kind of, or even make it kind of a V shape would be interesting.
Swoop. Like swoop down like that. Because that's how I see the action going. Yeah. But that was one that I scanned. And then the other one that I had made note of. And so I was interested, this was the reason I was interested in seeing the pencils here, is this is the dot pattern that got hand stippled in.
Oh, yeah.
Around the name tag.
Touch up in the pre-digital era, yeah. So
like, why wouldn't you just leave that white and make it like, just do like it's a badge, I thought that was so funny. So I wanted to see the pencils on that one, and it's another case of just a totally different composition altogether.
These must have just been his roughs. They must have been sent to the, for approval, or notes.
But they're really tight roughs. I mean, like,
he's a tight guy.
Full perspective on this. Like, if I was going to do that, I'd just hack out the perspective until it's time to go. So yeah, that one cracked me up.
Yeah, I like it's weirdly out of place for something where they have these intensely competent. I love the guy yawning in the background, by the way, but the intensely competent like production artists that are able to match the style when they need to, and just to like that. That feels like something that was like very last minute almost.
Yeah. Well, somebody might have missed that it was reversed. I mean, you talk about last minute. If it had already all been shot, all the camera work is done, and the touch-up artists are working on the overlays or whatever, and somebody hadn't reversed that. I mean, it might have been literally last minute.
Yeah.
Like no time for any more camera work last minute.
Okay,
that's the thing
I see.
Oh, you notice in the pencils he has the same thing written on the guy's shirt as in the
Ennui.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to see, if this
in
was
his rough.
On there.
Ennui is it's just wild to me. Absolutely wild.
That was important to him.
Yeah.
So if these things were written in English, then this could have been written by him originally. That's why I wanted to see in the pencils, was this in Japanese?
Yeah.
Or not. So I don't know. That to me was extremely comedic. Just like that you took the time to do that, but then you did it so poorly. Like, if you take the time to do that, don't do it.
Yeah, that is very weird. It looks very similar to the Orozowski lettering too.
Mm-hmm.
The E's are the same.
You have to check the unflopped one sometime.
Which you would know if you've been copying it. That's interesting that since you copied his stuff so much to learn how to letter, that you're like, yeah, I know that E.
I mean, I see it now and I'm like, that's my E.
This is totally your lettering. Well, compared to this E, like the swoop up versus the swoop down, I don't know if that's something that's indicative or not. So that's pretty much all the stuff.
I love the way he plays. I love the way he plays with the proportion when you back up into long shots, or basically like the different activities that she's doing and how it changes her physical proportions. And she's up to like a 5-to-1 head.
Yeah, it's much more cartoony. Also, just the nerve of sitting on the steps of a downtown polishing your gun.
I know. We're the only ones without anything to do. Oh well. Time to clean my gun.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, man, what a book. So this is what we have in for us here, huh?
Yeah, so instead of doing a recreation, since we've got some pencils, we're going to each ink this. I'm a bit terrified, I'll admit. It's been since I was like 20 that I drew any mecha.
Yeah, look, and I bet he drew the hands bigger in the inks because they look pretty small here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he didn't nail that foreshortening on it coming forward very well. They need to be like at least a here. So before we go though, I wanted to point out, like, Brandon, you've got a book that just finished and will be coming out in paperback collection pretty soon, right?
Oh yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about this book?
Sure.
Audience.
Yeah, so I did it. It's a 5-issue series I finished recently. It's coming out in trade, and it's essentially about it's kind of two storylines that interlink that are about kind of having your, I guess the core of it is having your plans for the future derail very dramatically and having to do things differently. And one of the stories about a guy who's studied really hard to go work in this giant walking city on a desert planet. And then once he's there, he realizes that he feels really out of place and doesn't particularly get much out of being there. And then the city is attacked by some mysterious force. And at the same time, there's an elderly super criminal who ends up going to rescue a friend of his daughter and having to transfer his brain into a different body. So he's in this genetically engineered butler body. And it's about how much of his personality was affected by his kind of chemicals. And when he's in a different body, experiencing different chemicals, and things taste different and the world is different, seems different to him, and how much of his personality was his body and how much was his mind.
Sounds fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, it's always hard to describe things, but
I'm looking forward to that. That's a question I argue with people about a lot, where they're like, oh, I could one day upload my brain, or we could become a cyborg. And I'm constantly telling them, you're not just your brain. As soon as you lose your body, or people that say one day I could experience the world through like we could have a virtual what it's like to be a spider. It's like, you can't just plug your brain in. Like, your brain processes stuff different than a spider. So that's, to me, that's a fascinating topic. So yeah, now I'm already excited. Now I'm extra excited to get
I feel like I knew some neurophilosophers years ago. I would get into these embarrassing conversations with them where I would always mention Star Trek whenever I talked to them, because that was my only go-to for science. But they were studying how much the chemicals in our brains affect what we think of as morality. So essentially, it was they were studying these animals called voles, like little mouse creatures, and depending on the amount of bonding chemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin that they would have in their brains, they would either be monogamous or just sleep with every vole imaginable. and how much like monogamy in these animals was just chemical and not like some morality or willpower.
Is oxytocin which one does oxytocin get you?
I think oxytocin, so oxytocin and vasopressin, I think, are basically bonding chemicals for men and women. They kind of do the same thing, I think.
Well, oxytocin is just like the love, like, because I've been reading stuff lately like that dogs have the same oxytocin release as humans, like so when you're petting your dog and they reach out and touch you with their hand, they're releasing the same oxytocin patterns in their brain as we are. So I was just curious, like, is a overabundance of oxytocin more likely to make you polyamorous, or is it more likely to make you monogamous?
If you're a vole.
I'm wondering.
I would just be guessing, but I mean, I would guess that it would probably be between a person, because a lot of problems that happen with like drug abuse is it screws up your chemicals. So you have mothers that kind of become horrible parents because because drugs are basically killing their bond with their child.
Right.
Interesting. It's killing the oxytocin bonds, because that's like the bonding chemical too. When the mother first has a baby, they get this insane dump of the oxytocin, and I think the baby gets it too.
Yeah, so it might just be a situation where you can have that for multiple people if you're just dumping out that chemical on a bunch of people, but it seemed like it would be very difficult if you just felt bonded to humanity,
Right.
Yeah, that would be a bummer.
Yeah, probably trusting a lot of the wrong people.
You said
that would be a hard lover to.
These friends were neurophilosophers. What was the neuro?
Yeah, neurophilosophers. They were it was my ex-wife's aunt and uncle.
Okay.
Were kind of famous, or they still are famous neurophilosophers, and their children were, and it's really fascinating because they had a daughter and a son, and their daughter was very kind of she kind of had airs about her in relation to it, and she would always say things like there's something at dinner where someone was rude to her, and she was like, "I'm a brain scientist," or she was like, "I'm a brain surgeon. Don't talk to me." And she kind of used it in a way. And then the son had the opposite effect, where I asked him what he did for a living once, and he just said, like, "I kill monkeys." It's interesting to see both sides of how people present that.
That's interesting that your bond with Shirow and Appleseed might manifest itself in your conversational interests with a ex-partner's familial relations.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, I'm for good or ill, all of my pretending to be a human in polite society is always through things I've learned in comic books. I remember I had a long conversation with someone about Herman Melville, entirely just pulling from the Bill Sienkiewicz adaptations of his work that I've read.
I would be pulling from Jeff Smith's Bone.
Yeah, that's good too.
It seems to me.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Please, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, Will Eisner did an adaptation of Moby Dick that's pretty good too. I've only read parts of it. That's in like one of his like how-to comics.
It's such a boring book that I even the Sienkiewicz version, I just flipped through for the art, and I'm like, I'm not reading this crap.
So he left out all the incorrect whaling facts.
Oh yeah, I wonder. I should read it at some point because I've got a friend that's like obsessed with it and is spoken of. So I can't speak ill of it, or else I'll wake up with a horse head in my bed.
My friend Helen, who's a Seattle cartoonist, if anyone dares speak ill of Moby Dick, we'll hear for a long period of time. So yeah, it's best that we leave that out for the safety of all involved.
Have you guys read the Herman Melville Bartleby the Scrivener?
Fantastic. Absolutely.
No.
One of my favorite short stories of all time.
Yeah, that's the one I know the best. It's basically the guy who refuses to do anything, and so he dies.
Yeah. I would prefer not to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of competence.
Yeah, he's the anti-Shirow.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to do it. I think Bartleby is due for a comeback, Brandon. I would recommend a graphic novel adaptation immediately.
It'd be great to you do a graphic novel adaptation, and it just opens up and just said, "I would prefer not to" on page 1, and then it's a blank book.
You can have it. You can just have his notes. All the annotations are all the things he was supposed to be writing.
Yeah.
This day I was supposed to be a scrivener. Is a Carson, somebody whose job it is to write basically like legal documents and things and make copies of it.
Okay.
And this guy has a job making copies of legal documents, and just one day he's like, I'm not going to do that. And everything that people tell him is met with the same opposition till the bitter end.
Yeah,
that sounds like a book I could draw, because I could just photograph a guy doing nothing and then just draw it.
Think about all the ways you could do nothing.
Yeah,
on your side.
Draw it once and just photocopy all the different pieces parts.
When you're using photo reference, do you find yourself, like, if there's a pose that you know really well, is it something that then you can pull from your head, where it's just like where you've done it recently and then can just recreate it?
Yeah, because I have problems with the pre-visualization stuff, it does. I think, Sean, we've talked about this before. It's almost like muscle memory. So if I've drawn something before, I can get a more accurate facsimile of it just because I can repeat the motions, is what makes sense to me. But it still doesn't look as good, it has more flaws in it. It becomes more styled. If I just start doodling, I can wind up with all kinds of different things that look like I have all kinds of ideas in my head. But if I had to take that character and then draw them again, like in a predetermined, like, now make them do this, I would have a hard time visualizing it.
I found that developing the visualization for me, especially with figures, involved a lot of kinetic motion. And, you know, I'd actually do some of the things that I was intending to draw and feel the actual like body map shift of the motion and try to get to the point where I'm basically thinking myself as a mannequin or something. And then being able to sort of connect it to the body map seemed like to me that was a way of developing that.
I do have a strong pre-visualization for like motion. Like I can imagine motion. So like Tori had told me about running away from she was running away from some animal. And I very clearly saw like a stick and a ball, you know, like, and the speed of that in my head, but that's about as specific as it got. Yeah, or like moving through a map of a place. So motion is good for me, but form is very difficult. So I connect it. I can show Sean.
Oh, there you go.
I meant to hit share screen. Yeah, Sean, this was actually based on your recommendations of trying to rotate things in my head, and then what I do with my students, which is have them draw with their eyes closed and touch stuff. So I closed my head and then tried to move my mental eye around the object. Mm-hmm. And then these were drawn with my eyes closed. So I like looked at Tori working on her homework and closed my eyes. And this was just me kind of making up a creature as I went. And this was Tori describing something to me.
It's funny. The blind drawing really confused me when I first ran into it. What's his name? The guy that did the comic Jimbo. Gary Panter.
Right.
I interviewed Gary Panter years ago and asked him for a drawing, and he drew me. He looked out the window and drew me a picture of I think it was Godzilla with a saxophone. And I always had this weird reaction to blind drawing that I was kind of like, my initial reaction was to be offended, and then I was like, oh, this guy isn't trying to. He isn't just like, I don't care about your sketchbook. He was just doing this technique that was totally alien to me because I didn't go to art school. So what's your concept of why blind drawing's useful?
The reason I have my students do it is because I'm trying to subvert the linguistic function of the way they draw, which is they draw on icons. And that's related to the use value of the object. That's how I describe it. So when we draw an icon, we're just drawing how you use it. And that's derived, Sean, we talked about this last time, I think, about Heidegger's idea of something that you're using versus something that's broken and you're staring at it. So when they draw a cup and they draw a flat line on the bottom and a circle on top, that's like it sets on a table and you get the water out of the circle, and they don't draw it in perspective. So I'm trying to subvert that by putting them back in touch with the motion of their eyes. They're looking at something, the saccadic motion. So when you look at something, your eye bounces around a bunch of times per second to focus your fovea on the details, and then your brain stitches that. That's something we were talking about with Shirow, that ability to like connect multiple different disparate things into a stable image, the ice cream thing, right? Really? And so there's a component of that in visual perception. And I feel like, Sean, we were talking about this, that's kind of how kids draw, is they can't draw the thing because they don't know what the thing is yet. All they can draw is the experience of looking at it. And the experience of looking at it is the experience of your eye moving around it. Okay. Yeah. So I have my students close their eyes and touch the thing three-dimensionally and synchronize. You know, I mean, it's hard to push through the paper, but you try and figure out, okay, I'm going over. And so I start blind drawing that way. And then I slowly have them open their eyes and trace their finger and then just point at it. And so now you're following, your hands following your finger, but really following your eyes. So developing hand-eye coordination that way.
I like that.
And then you have them take the finger out of it, but look at the object, but not the paper. And you're not drawing the thing, you're just drawing the motion of your eye over the thing. And it's a hand-eye coordination. Another thing I do is I have videos where I drew in Photoshop. So I printed out a drawing that I had pre-made that's all one line and taped it to my tablet, and then I made like a couple layers in Photoshop. So I'm drawing in the same gray that there's what the image is, a gray layer, and then I'm drawing on a third layer. And it's their job to just follow the cursor around the screen. And then you remove the gray layer and they can see what they've been drawing the whole time.
Right.
And it's fascinating because it teaches them that, like, if I ask them to draw a dog, they probably draw a cartoon dog. If they just hand-eye coordinate, they'll draw like a perfectly real, most of them will do amazingly good jobs and they'll be like, holy shit, that's a dachshund. But they had no idea they were drawing a dachshund. So it's something that tries to get them to trust their system too, you know, like get yourself out of the way and just trust the system. So when I was doing the blind drawing with my mental, trying to get better back to the imaginative part of me, I was trying to do that, just like try and hold a persistent image in my mental conception and then trace it out onto the paper. But I still found that I couldn't hold the persistent image. I could only imagine, okay, I'm creating this part, I'm creating this part, I'm creating this part. So I can't form like a photographic image of something in my head yet, but I'm trying to work on it.
Okay, that's fascinating.
The division for me between observational drawing, that is pure observational drawing, which is the sort of formal training type of stuff that, you know, we're talking about with blind contour and things like that, and imaginative or pre-visualization drawing, there's such a gap for most people are sitting on one side of this fence or the other. And it's funny when you teach somebody how to draw observationally, it really, like we talked about before, Carson, it's almost like you're teaching them to start regarding objects like a schizophrenic, like somebody who's having a dissociative state, where instead of seeing the utility of the object or the symbolism or the object or the meaning of the object, you're literally telling them to dissociate from it and have a purely visual experience with it. Whereas somebody like, that's why I'm fascinated by somebody like Shirow or like Gerhard, who seems to have both on all cylinders. Somebody who can imagine a human form in a simplified form and replicate it and move it around like a mannequin in their head, but also is capable of storing up vast amounts of visual, you know, observed detail that they can then lavish on these sort of, you know, mannequin forms or whatever.
Yeah, certainly. It makes me think of I get a lot out of drawing trees lately. And I think part of it is that if you go outside and you find a tree and you just draw it, then you kind of it forces you away from your preconceived ideas of what a tree is, because trees don't look, it's not like you're drawing a person and you're like, this arm should be this relation to the head. When you draw a tree, it's just, they're all different shapes and you can just focus on the shapes and not the, you know, the cartoon idea of a tree.
And the structural things that you think you know about it, like with a human. But structure is pretty foreign to most students too. That's always interesting to teach them structure. But it's interesting you bring Shirow back up and how he combines those two, because when I was talking about how bad I feel about teaching students to draw realistically, my thing is I feel like I'm teaching them to see the world as if the world's broken, because when you see detail, when you use a door, you see rectangle and circle. Like I'm trying to get through the rectangle and I grab the circle. When the door's broken, you start looking at all of the hinges and how they're going and when you see the scuffs and all that stuff. So by teaching them to draw like realistically, I do feel like I'm teaching them to see like a mechanic, like the car's broken. So Shirow, talking about him being so mechanical, yeah, it is interesting to see he has that mechanic's eye of all the details and the intricacies. But then, yeah, like I'm so jealous. Like if I could see shit in my head that clear, like as good of a copy machine as I am, you know, like I could just, but I can't. So
I wonder what kind of reference he got into. There's an interesting thing when Shirow started getting into color stuff, kind of pre-Photoshop. He had a color photocopier, and he would do these interesting things where he would just find like a sheet of metal and color copy it and then cut it out to be the shape of a gun and paste it on his watercolor drawing.
A collage element.
Yeah,
Maniac.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Yeah, it was a really cool trick. But it was interesting because I feel like once Photoshop showed up, that it must have been so exciting to him that he could do that in the computer, and I feel like it lost something by the time that he was not cutting it out and doing it.
Yeah,
it got too easy. Like
well,
that. So I remember Ghost in the Shell to me looked very like cut and pasty textury.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember.
Oh, I didn't think we showed. Do you still have the image I sent you of his pens?
Oh, I think you sent that to my phone. Yeah.
of his pens.
Yeah, I found a
I
photograph.
forgot to send that to myself.
Oh my gosh.
Say interesting stuff for a few minutes, and I'll go back and Google drop that to myself and pull it up.
Of all the weird. Sorry, what was that?
No, go ahead.
I was saying of all the weird things is I have a little supplement book from Wizard magazine about Ghost in the Shell that has a photograph of Shirow's desk and his art supplies, which is the weirdest thing that it's not in like any of his art books or Dark Horse or anything. Also, one of the other weird things I got a hold of is this thing called Neurohard, which is the last comic Shirow did. It's another unfinished thing. And the idea of this, it was going to be a shared universe that he was going to basically, like this book is kind of laying down the groundwork for other people to come in and tell stories in his universe. But he didn't finish it and never kind of opened it up to the world. But it's all about like space colonizers going to a planet with giant insects on it. It's really fascinating, beautiful stuff.
What's the year on that? Oh man,
this was the late 90s. This is a newer printing of it, so I don't know if it'll actually have it in it. But yeah, I just found this. There's in Portland. There's a Kinokuniya Japanese bookstore here.
Right.
There's one in Seattle and
a
couple in California, and they just this and the Shirow pencils were just in there.
Wow.
You know.
There you go.
Oh man.
And when Brandon sent this to me, I said, "Where the hell's all his inking tools?" Because I see like this gigantic brush over here, and
airbrush.
I don't even know what are these.
A burnisher at top. He's probably using that to burnish tone. Keep it laying flat down on the page. There's his nib right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I was guessing. Is it's like a flattish, like squarish, not round tip.
Yeah,
I'm really surprised he's not using technical pens.
The Z pen or the G pen, whatever they call it. These are obviously all for cutting tones. I like this for picking the tone off. Airbrush the
heads,
ink drippers. Just a very slight curve.
Right, it's like a French curve, but it's like just got a barely any taper at all. It's interesting.
Weird pencil holder. I don't know why he's got a palette knife and then a couple little brushes. I guess he does do a lot of color work. But I just love this, like looking at that book, I'm thinking, what the hell is that just for like sweeping off eraser shavings or something?
Yeah, I think it probably is. And is that an ink dish on the right?
Yeah, that looks like it. It almost looks like he's got the grinder too.
Right.
Grind sume ink potentially.
Huh.
I don't know what that is. And I don't know what this thing is either. If that's just something on the desk.
Huh.
I don't know. It was interesting though. The first thing I latched onto was that gigantic brush. It's like, oh, he drew all of that machinery with and then these two things. I wonder if some of this is like for grinding the ink too. That might be the stone for grinding the ink.
Right.
I don't know. But he's got an ink bottle up here too, so who knows? I've switched back and forth between the Sume and the India ink though. Like I'll use the Sume for the brush and the India ink for the pen. Not as much anymore, but I was doing that for a while. So he might be using two different kinds of inks for different purposes. Who knows?
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting because you don't see much taper in his lines. I guess there's a little bit.
Right. Those fairly rigid school type pens like that don't necessarily have, unless you're really applying pressure.
His line seems pretty similar to Otomo's to me.
Mm-hmm.
And they have it where things get a little gummed up. They're drawing back and forth a little too much, and the edges get like where lines meet, they kind of overfill them in a little bit too much for my taste. But Otomo really does it in a way that's not bothersome. Anyway, speaking of that, are we ready to go ahead and jump into getting the pencils and going crazy on those?
Shall we try it?
Yeah. All right. So thanks so much for joining us for this, like, God knows how long this has been conversation. 3 hours. It's been awesome.
It's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. And now we're going to jump over and draw this piece. We're all going to try and ink it and see what our different solutions are. So join us for that video. God knows how long it will be.
After we've gone to the bathroom.
Yeah.